So good afternoon, everyone. We're sorting out technology just a little bit. But this is another meeting in the Building Energy Code Working Group. And today is October 22nd, 2024, and we're getting underway just after 1 o'clock.
Let's check. Can everyone who's online hear all right? Yes. Okay, good.
Okay, great. As usual, we'll start with approval of minutes. So is there a motion to approve the minutes of, October 11th?
I wasn't here, but so moved.
Thank you, Mr. Campany. Okay, any edits or amendments to those minutes?
I have questions.
Okay.
And I was not here, but I just, and one of the takeaways, is actually a couple of takeaways on what I'm questioning. It says that OPR is developing a contractor certification. I understood that to be a voluntary certification. The big difference between the certification and voluntary certification. Actual certification. Thus far, OPR is a voluntary certification.
Sir.
I'm sorry, but we can't hear anything.
That's what I'm trying to find out.
Well, we still discuss it.
He can take it up some other time, right? I mean,
You're looking for a clarification. What do we mean by certification? Whether it's voluntary or a additional mandatory certification.
I mean, there's several parts. So I've been at every meeting but one.
Yeah, and I'm not trying to shut it down.
No, I understand,
minutes on that, right?
but I understand that, but there's several parts of these minutes that semi-reflect past discussions, and I don't believe they're accurate. But I'll hold off and I'll come back to it later, because I've got questions surrounding how we're going to implement this.
Sure. Well, thank you for, reading them carefully, and it's good to be explicit. If there's something vague, that doesn't do anyone a favor. But with that understanding that we'll come back to those points up, and even if we don't resolve them today, let's get them all listed in the minutes of today's meeting.
Okay.
Right.
So they'll be on the record.
I'm
Great.
happy with that.
Okay, great. Yes.
May I add one? Thank you, Matt Bushich, AI Vermont. I had one comment on the minutes as well. On charge 3, consider whether or not the state should adopt a statewide building code. The minutes state that the group decided to defer this discussion to next year's working group sessions. We didn't have a lot of discussion on that in the meeting, but I wanted to suggest that that we need not defer our full response to that charge to next year. That the charge is pretty simple. Consider whether or not the state should do this. I would say that the answer is yes, the state should. And I would suggest that in our report this year, we could repeat some of the supporting information that was included in the last year's report to kind of support that yes answer. And it's a yes and. The and is yes, the state should do it. And DFS has this working group and they're going to figure out how to do it. So I don't think saying yes, the state should do it eliminates the possibility that the DFS working group could come back and say, we looked at this and we actually didn't find that it was feasible. But I just wanted to throw that out there to make sure that I was interpreting the minutes correctly and understanding how this was going to be addressed in the report.
But they did actually say that at a previous meeting, that it wasn't feasible for them to do.
Well, that's the part that I think would be deferred to next year's report.
Okay.
But I just didn't want us to completely punt on this whole charge and what that's perhaps what the minutes.
Okay, so Kelly, you wrote our minutes? Yes.
I drafted the
yeah.
minutes, yeah.
All right, so how about this? Let's, if people are comfortable doing it this way, we'll approve the minutes, move on, come back and flag these items as something that merits further discussion. I don't want to lose them. I don't want to derail us entirely, but I also don't want to, I respect that everyone is flagging stuff. That's very helpful. And let's just make sure we also record them while we're here today together. Okay, thank you. So then all those in favor, please say aye. Caveats noted. Aye. Anyone opposed? Abstain. I will. Okay, the minutes are approved. Thank you very much. So we have a little work to do on those, a new item for our list. And that brings us to the second item on our list, following up from last meeting. And we had a rich discussion that precluded finishing some of our discussion then. So I think back over to you, Richard.
Sure. So I was just going to provide a little bit of recap of last meeting and ask for any additional suggestions, recommendations that you may have considered, thought about in the interim. So just as a reminder, the charge number one that we talked about at the last meeting was recommend strategies and programs to increase awareness of and compliance with the RBs and CBs, including the use of appropriate certifications for contractors trained on the energy codes. So the key takeaways, as summarized in the minutes, we had a robust discussion with Jen Cullen and the work group here about OPR's work on developing voluntary RBs, voluntary certifications, including RBs, OSHA, and building science principles as the three that OPR seems to be working on. Our jurisdiction interest here is in the RBs certification, voluntary certification. We also had a discussion and seemed to be consensus around working with DFS as they expand their permit database to include some opportunities for RBs and CBs to be included under those buildings that they have jurisdiction over. And we'll probably get into some more of that today as well too, as we talk about the role of DFS in RBs and CBs going forward. We had shared some of the work that Energy Futures Group is doing with a number of partners under the DOE grant, including efforts for code training, awareness, compliance, hiring a circuit rider, working with municipal organizations and outreach around getting the word out. So that's underway. That includes new efforts focused on lenders, attorneys, real estate professions as well too. That's part of the plan there. One of the other things we talked about too was the ongoing role that the energy efficiency utilities may be playing in this space. It's a work in progress, and our understanding is that the Department of Public Service and PUC and the energy efficiency utilities are under discussions for the role that they can play in supporting code compliance. We had some discussion as well too about potential improvements to the OPR website that would make consumer access more user friendly.
Richard?
Yeah, I was kind of sorry, we got down the road a little farther than I wanted to, but so where am I? Charge one, right? And this is, I was confused who's going to oversee certifications. Is it OPR or is it Department of Fire Safety?
OPR is tasked right now with doing that. I know there's some discussion about potentially others, but they are currently in the works right now. We've had a number of discussions with them and along with the International Codes Council and others. So it's OPR.
You said actually in a subsequent sentence that it was the DFS, so that's what confused me.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So that's
I'm sorry if I
okay, so
misspoke.
it's just
OPR.
They would just reside there, they'd be part of that licensure.
Yes.
Yeah. And this, I mean, Richard, to your question, this is what kind of certification, where we're talking, I mean, and I remember the discussion, but, who's going to do the certifying or where they're going to come from? And I think that would help answer that question. So,
Okay, yeah. And there's some challenges with language around this because what are called certifications, it can be interpreted and defined differently.
Jen is on. I mean, maybe they want to define it for us if she's
Sure.
able to do that. I saw her on the screen.
Yeah, hi folks. Apologies, I'm not on screen. Not gonna have my camera on because I'm a little under the weather.
No, nobody is, so don't worry about it.
But certifications, the legislature called what OPR is supposed to kind of build for contractors, called them certifications. They're really like specialty endorsements on someone's registration. So contractors register with OPR, and everybody working directly with homeowners on projects for more than $10,000 are required to register with OPR. And once they're registered, there will be specialty endorsements available for them. And we'll probably call them specialty certifications, at least in the areas of OSHA, ARBIes, and building science principles. And those specialty endorsements are voluntary. So essentially how that would work is that a contractor would complete a program out, that's been either pre-approved by OPR or that contains the competencies that OPR has laid out in administrative rules. And then there will be some sort of assessment. For ARBIes, my understanding is that the ICC is going to be creating an assessment to test ARBIes' competencies and knowledge. And once they have those two elements, once they've completed the training and the assessment, they bring that to OPR and they say, I've done this. And OPR says, great, we are going to give you a specialty certification.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Peter, and Jen, thanks for the clarification there. And so that was the summary takeaway of sort of the high level discussion last time. And I did want to open it up as well too, as I indicated earlier. Are there any other sort of activities, suggestions that we should be thinking about going forward in support of that charge, Chris?
So I would suggest that awareness, training, information we've gotten to the municipal flood hazard administrators, the floodplain administrators, and maybe work with, I can't speak for all of my counterparts, but oftentimes the RPCs will organize training for the floodplain administrators. So I think I can commit that the RPCs could work that into future trainings, like raising awareness of it. I don't know if the VLCT could, but we all have these clinics, right, that we do for different zoning and administrative officials. So I guess I'm just trying to figure out, work that into trainings for the flood hazard bylaw administrators. And we should probably be best to work with Rebecca Pfeiffer on a very brief one pager, directing them to where they can find information online, basically what this is. very just plain English, USA Day language, you know, what is the, building energy code and how does it work?
I think that's a great suggestion, and it's right in line with, as part of EFG's DOE code, we're working closely with VAPTA, the Regional Planning Commissions, and have a plan that we've put together for coordinating with them and outreach avenues. I don't know that we specifically called out the floodplain administrators as part of that, so I think that's a great suggestion. We can certainly add that to that plan.
They're typically zoning administrators or somebody.
Well, sometimes, I mean, that is the only zoning that exists, so that may be the only
So
building
it's
type
like
of
a select board or somebody.
or sometimes a total volunteer, sometimes it's like a town clerk, it varies greatly. So, but it's a way, for especially those towns without zoning, but also frankly, it's critical because they're not, oftentimes the zoning administrator is the flood hazard, but may not always be.
Right. Gotcha.
So it's just good for them to be aware, because it's just another way to get that information out. Also, as they're looking at like substantial improvements to a property. Sure. Being able to factor in like, hey, you're going to have to bring the code, are you factoring that into the value of the improvements, which would then trigger other actual flood insurance program. Yep. Requirements. Yeah.
So,
You had a question from.
well, I want to follow up with what Chris is talking about too. Sorry, Sandy. How would this connect with this? I mean, this is not a certification for
Get the
buildings.
information out about what the law exists and
To
the code.
the what do you call it? The management administrators.
Right. What I'm reading here is, you know, as part of strategies and programs to increase awareness of and compliance with RVs and CVs.
Yeah.
Any additional suggestions or recommendations on that's.
That's okay.
So basically, getting that same information you already get to municipalities, targeting the flood hazard administrator.
Got it. Okay, good. Thank you.
Yep. Chris, how,
Sandy had a question too.
well, just, before we leave the flood hazard mitigation officers, or floodplain administrators, and, in Wyndham County, how many towns do you have and how many that's their only form, the only form of
Okay,
zoning?
so we have 27 towns. We have 3 towns without even town plans. Athens is now working towards adopting flood hazard regs for the first time. So I think of our 27 towns, gosh, to be honest, I don't remember off the top of my head how many don't have zoning, but it's actually, it's not an insignificant percent. So, I mean, just off the top of my head, you know,
Like
Grafton, Townsend, I mean, towns you would know. That the only zoning they have apart from maybe subdivision regs is flood hazard regulations.
Sandy?
To make sure everybody can see. So a report came out from PR in September, and BBRA spent a lot of time thinking about it and responded last month. I can supplied a copy of the letter from BBRA to this group. And there are some fundamental difficulties with the system that we set up in 2021. And I'd like to recognize we did the best we could with the energy we had and with the information we had all those years ago. The report makes it clear that OPR is not prepared to deal with competence, particularly during construction, which is the best time to address competence. They had proposed in the report an end zone for fire safety oversight when the building's completed, and then after that, it would become a consumer affair. That doesn't make sense in construction. If you think about it, fire safety has an ongoing relationship with their contractors, their special trades. And it starts when a kid is training as an apprentice. It continues. If there's a problem or the building changes use, the fire safety comes back. So BBRA proposes instead distinguishing between competence and fraud. Fire safety is not set up to deal with fraud. And that boils down to the difference between the individual and the business. So right now, we have a very strange thing going on with the program that has been set up. It talks about a person registering, and we understand that a person can be a corporation, but it's a person registering with OPR. It's actually a business. And the certifications will have to be listed underneath that entity. So for instance, if John Smith becomes a certified RVs builder or anything we might come up with someday, the BPI credential, somehow it's going to be listed under the business's name. So if John Smith leaves the business, what happens? I think the parallel really stands out when you think about an architect. Licensure is granted to the person. They get hired by a business. They cannot call themselves an architectural design firm unless they have on staff one architect. But the business is not censured or sanctioned if something goes wrong underneath that person's license. Our license travels with us. Our credentials travel with us. Our penalties travel with us. There's a clear distinction between the business that's making the contract and the individual who's getting trained. We've pointed this out to OPR and we also sent the letter to fire safety. The proposal is a swap because right now electricians and plumbers are exempted from the registration. And I don't know if this group knows that there's a whole bunch of trades that do not register. But oddly, fire safety can't investigate for fraud. So a whole big chunk of contract work in Vermont, there's no real avenue to deal with fraud right now. So the idea is to swap. I have not heard anything specific from fire safety nor from OPR, but from the bits I heard is that people are beginning to think about this idea. I'd like to suggest that the $200,000 appropriated was not a waste of funds at all. The OPR has done an amazing job of calling together people and starting to call this out. But I would hope that we can correct the mistake this year in the legislature while the ship is just leaving the port before it gets really ingrained in the wrong place and we have really major problems. The one brought up at the last meeting that a quote license is now being issued to contractor companies makes no sense. And we could change the word, it could become the piece of paper could have another name, but that's just one example of how things, when the fundamental structure is off, they kind of wing off into more chaos later. So
just a question. So are you suggesting that it's not the contractor that should be registering with OPR, it's actually the individual employees?
No, we're suggesting that anything related to contract writing, stick with the business, the entity that's signing the contract, and that continue to be at OPR. And not only that, electricians and plumbers who do residential work should also be on the registry. And that the certification of individuals would move over to fire safety, and they're already set up to do that with specialty trades. And that the individual would be certified there. It's a stay voluntary system, but then the business could list their staff certifications on the registration site for OPR. So there would still be a sharing of qualifications on the website that OPR runs. But if the person leaves, then the certification would go away from the business, if that makes sense.
Jennifer has her hand up.
Thank
Might
you.
have a response.
Jennifer.
Hi, folks. Well, not really a response to all of the points that Sandy raised, but I did want to kind of make a slight correction. In OPR's report, we weren't really making a recommendation that, DFS have jurisdiction over a project while it was in process, and then OPR kind of pick up jurisdiction once a project was complete. We were trying to distinguish between how DFS does its code enforcement work versus how OPR does its regulatory work looking at whether fraud has occurred. So we were not trying to make a recommendation there. We were just kind of pointing out a difference. And if, you know, and if we missed the boat on that, you know, happy to have a better understanding and conversations about that. But we were just pointing out how the two agencies work differently in the space. And the other thing I'm just thinking about is, as Sandy's talking about individuals being like registered with OPR and also businesses being registered. I mean, OPR is in this regulatory space specifically to prevent fraud. So the reason that individuals and businesses are allowed to register is because what we're trying to get at is, who is the homeowner paying? That's who we need to have jurisdiction over, because whoever they're writing the check to is the one that could potentially commit the fraud. So my understanding is that is why the structure is what it is, because OPR was limited in its scope to oversight of fraud and not oversight of quality. So I just wanted to point those two things out as part of this conversation.
Just very quickly. Sure. I just want to point out, I'm thinking of Mike Handian, who's a sole proprietor. When he signs, if he decides to start signing contracts, he would sign it as an individual, but actually as a sole proprietor. Because when a person collects any funds for doing work, they have to report it under Schedule C. So they're actually signing a contract as a business entity, even if it's a very small business entity.
Yeah, and I'm just, if I feel like we're going back and forth between residential housing and Department of Fire Safety that doesn't really oversee residential or single family housing and more commercial. So it seems to me like that separation, you know, is one of the reasons why it's with OPR, right? I mean, if they're really truly looking at fraud from residential to the biggest commercial, then that would be, you know, the appropriate place for it.
Anyone else?
So within the notes here, someplace, it says that we will reference, we won't add to, we'll add some recommendations on top of 47, which is here. 47 is pretty clear that DFS and PSD, fire safety and public service, want nothing to do with this. They want nothing to do with this. It's very clear what they're saying on page 25 under section recommendations for legislative action. It also, in here, they speak very strongly, as OPR did, that this is a voluntary generic certification for each trade.
Right.
So if we're dovetailing off 47 as I believe your minutes point out, or maybe it was your discussion from, no, it's your suggestion in your building code working group report, which is also referenced in the minutes from last time that we can't discuss yet. But if we're going down that rat hole, understand what that rat hole says. And I'm not sure we're all fully aware of what the Act 47 recommendations were going forward, because they are very clear that these other groups want nothing to do with this.
Well, so I'll speak for myself and others who were on the group before, and please chip in. Well, my sense is, it's one of those things where the original report, we went, like 2 steps forward and 1 step back kind of a thing. And so like we wanted to get to clarity on who would manage all this stuff going forward. But it was more than we could agree to, and then it gets spelled out in the report as don't go there. But I think the conversation during the legislative session and then reestablishing this working group, I think from my perspective, it was like people saying, okay, well, we recognize the pushback, but a majority of the group was also saying it seemed like the most natural home for the material, for the tasks and duties.
I may be mistaken, but I'm not hearing that and have not heard that in 4 meetings. That is the avenue. I'm hearing it from you guys. I'm hearing you interpreting what you want to hear, but I'm not hearing that from the group out here.
Well, I think, so towards the end of last session, before we did the report, we took a straw poll of the group, and I think there were 23 of us there, and I think 21 said the move to DFS made sense and think of a path for the law. Well, it wasn't binding, I'm thinking, I don't know that so my own take is I haven't thought of the report from last year as a recipe or something that spells out what we must do this year, more like scaffolding, like we worked, and now we're still working on the same structure, but I don't want to, I'm not trying to spin it. That's really my understanding of how we finished up. So, yeah.
Yeah, jump in. I've been thinking about this a lot, and so now it seems like a good time to chime in. I've been thinking a lot about how the Act 47 report compares to this year's report. How does last year's working group compare to this year's working group? And the way I see it is that last year, the charge was broader. It was to look at different options. The wording of the charge was to look at kind of potential options for the AHJ, including DFS. And so it was kind of broader in scope, the what. The way I see this year's charge is that it's more about the how, that the charge is more specific. It doesn't say look at different options. It says, okay, look at DFS and kind of come up with plans to make it work. Like, how would this work? So I think it's narrower and deeper. So I think all of the dissents from the first report may or may not carry through because it's a different kind of charge. Like, the question of whether it will be DFS to me is not the question anymore. So any dissent on that question really is not applicable in this year's report. The question is, how can we make it work? Now, the DFS working group may come back, like I said earlier, and determine that it's not feasible. That's one possibility. But I think the charge is like, it's different. It's I hope that there's less dissent this time around because we all want to make it work, right? And since DFS is actually in the middle of this study, that's a great thing. So
Mike has been clear, and he's on the call, I think, today, all along. So I don't feel like we're missing that pushback. There's still a concern about it, but I think the legislature moved the needle some and said, if and how would we do this? It wasn't quite, it didn't declare that is where we're going, but that if we were to do this, how would we do it? It was like letting out I would say it was like letting out the clutch. I would expect that this report plus the next legislative session would say, might well lead to, I don't want to prejudge, someone saying, okay, this is still the strongest option, so let's continue to move the ball down the field that way.
But as you let the clutch out,
yeah.
if you have bad fuel in the tank, it's going to hesitate like all hell, right? And so we should be able to come out of this with some sort of good fuel. And all I'm pointing out is from from, I'll say it up front, I'm gonna fight you tooth and nail,
Sure.
okay? You keep that fuel in the tank and I'll have you stuttering all the way down the road.
Hey. Well, we'll hope that we find something that ends the
Better get
hesitation.
some stabilizer.
Some stable-
Oh, should we move forward on the agenda? So we're kind of getting into agenda item 4, and I wonder if we want to pit stop at agenda number 3 before you move into 4.
Okay, so, Richard, do you know what you have here for stuff to go through? I don't know if we're ready to move on to 3, the DOE.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a way to continue the discussion we were just having and kickstart. And it's a nice segue, I hope, into agenda item number 4, which is discussing charge number 2 to develop plans and recommendations for potential transition to a comprehensive program for RBs and CVs at DFS. Let me see if I can share my screen real quick. Unless, are you sharing, do you have the visualization that Kelly circulated by any chance?
Yeah, take the second.
I have it up. It's easier for me to just share my screen.
You have a share button on your.
Yeah, I gotta make the co-host. I just did.
Okay, great. Thanks. Okay. Okay, can folks see that all right? I'll scroll down as we go, walk through this. So under the DOE Recce grant that EFG is working on, we are charged with putting together an energy code administration plan as part of the grant. And that's essentially a vision for administering the residential energy code, specifically is what the DOE grant is focused on. As part of that, we've been working on a visualization to help think through the relationships and activities that would go into an energy code administration plan and what the outcomes might be. And so we thought it might be helpful to walk through some of the draft relationships that we've put together. So we've sort of split off a few of the activities. There are others that would flow into this model around training activities and education, voluntary certifications. But this is, these are 3 activities listed at the top here. And then we have short, medium, and long-term outcomes. Each of those are associated with a 2-year timeframe in this model. But the 3 activities at the top are those that, I think we've been talking about here amongst this working group in some way, shape, or form. And we thought it would be helpful just to sort of walk through some of these relationships and what an iterative and incremental process might be to this transition to a comprehensive RBs and CBs program at DFS. Or an established AHJ. So I'll lead with that. The idea is that this segues into our broader conversation, but I think, so maybe let me walk through this and then we can do questions afterward if that works for folks. So I'll start at the top. We have 3 activities here. So develop a database to log RBs and CBs certificates. We then have conduct energy code verification activities. That's intentionally vague as an activity, as you'll see as we talk through this, that conceptually what is considered verification activities might evolve over time as we move forward. And then the third activity at the top is pass legislation to establish a designated statewide AHJ authority having jurisdiction for RBs and CBs. So moving to the second row, these are short-term outcomes that would be the results within 1 to 2 years of these activities. So starting on the left, we have an increase in the number of certificates. Those would be RBs and CBs certificates tracked by municipalities. And that's flowing out of the activity of developing an RBs and CBs database. And the thinking there is that as that database is being developed, perhaps there's a push for municipalities in terms of awareness and education to more comprehensively track these certificates so that they're ready to drop into this database when that's available. So that's sort of one of the short-term outcomes is hopefully an increase in the number of certificates that are being tracked and logged. We then have the second short-term outcome, which would be new construction activity and compliance pathways analyzed. And this is an output from the development of that database and the previous outcome. So essentially, once a database is in place and enough RBs and CBs certificates have been logged, there's a rich data set to mine there to inform future energy code discussions, training activities, et cetera. So a near-term step would be to analyze that data. What are the compliance paths that contractors are using to comply with the code? What are the types of equipment going in, fuel types, et cetera? And the last short-term outcome would be an AHJ acknowledges and tracks code certificates for buildings outside of owner-occupied single family. So this would be sort of the short-term energy code verification step, simply acknowledging and tracking these certificates, getting a database in place. And so those three activities would lead to those three short-term outcomes. And then we move down to medium-term outcomes, which would be 2 to 4 years in this timeline. And those short-term outcomes flow into these medium-term outcomes. So starting on the left, we would refocus training activities and technical assistance associated with the energy code. So that would flow out of, again, analyzing the permit data. That was an outcome in the short term. That would lead to the second medium-term outcome we have listed, which is to increase code compliance among contractors. So as we refocus training activities and learn more about what contractors are doing, where there might be potential pitfalls, improve training and increase code compliance along the way. This is also tied to the increased tracking of certificates by municipalities as they're increasing their tracking of certificates. They, in theory, are notifying more contractors about these requirements. People are becoming more aware of them, paying more attention to the energy code requirements, and that also would feed to an increase in code compliance. I'm going to jump over to the far right box of the medium-term outcomes. And so in the short term, we said sort of a short-term verification step would just be acknowledging and tracking certificates. In the midterm, the next step of that might be energy code verification for non-owner occupied single-family buildings, where verification at this phase might be a plan review for buildings currently under DFS jurisdiction, specifically for the energy code. Perhaps it's a plan review and an on-site inspection for those buildings currently under DFS jurisdiction. And also simultaneously, tracking owner-occupied single-family RB certificates through the database, which is not part of sort of the initial activity around the permit database. That would lead to a benefit for municipalities once all buildings were being tracked in the statewide database. There's potential for municipalities to no longer need to log these certificates, and sort of the entire process would be funneled through the statewide RBs and CBs database, along with permits and whatever else DFS has plans for in the database. And then we move down to long-term outcomes, which this is 2030 timeframe, where the outcomes would be sustainable funding for energy code administration. The code advances to net zero levels by 2030, which is a state target. And comprehensive energy code administration for all buildings. So in theory, you're moving from the midterm outcomes where you might have some plan review or site verification for buildings currently under DFS jurisdiction to by these long-term outcomes, you're including owner occupied, single family. So that's just, we thought it might be helpful to walk through a visualization and how these relationships might work together, and also, yeah, how there might be incremental steps that can be taken to sort of ultimately end up with the comprehensive RBs and CBs administration at DFS or another AHJ if that were to be the case.
Is this modeled on a process elsewhere that you're familiar with, or are we sort of cooking from scratch here?
No other state has the structure that we have, or lack thereof.
Right.
Yeah, so it's original material.
Didn't know if we had the opportunity to sort of clone from it someplace or not. Chris?
So it's not necessarily true, right?
What's
You've
that?
got 20 some odd states that have no oversight or energy codes.
There are some states with home rule energy code, which is municipality to municipality within a state. I'm not sure.
It's in it's in this 47 building study.
Okay.
I'm just.
I thought that and Sandy just left the room, but I thought that the study that she did last year, and that maybe Matt, you could speak to it, is indicated that we're the only state that is now.
Yeah, it's a great table in last year's report that shows that Vermont is the only state without either
RBS code.
a pathway.
But are there states that haven't adopted an energy code at all? I think this may be.
That's what I'm saying.
Oh, haven't adopted energy code.
Yeah, so they're not enforced because they don't have any.
That's correct.
Chris, thank you for your patience.
Sure. So where it says increased number of certificates tracked by municipalities, are you talking about those municipalities that require certificate of occupancy?
I was specifically referring to RBs and CBs certificates.
But towns aren't required to track, that's something new, and the towns aren't required to track.
They have to file it in the land records.
Every new home is required, right, is required to file at the town clerk, put a copy in the home and send a copy to the Department of Public Service.
Right, but I guess.
It's not the town's responsibility, though. It's the builder or the owners, right?
Correct.
Yes.
My concern is, and this is not, this is an overview, so I'm not saying this. Sure. I just want to make sure that that's not reflecting a new thing for towns to do. That the onus is on the owner builder to do it, not for the town. That's not what he's saying.
Yeah, I think that's true. Track might not be the right word. It's filed, you know.
Fine.
They file it.
That's good clarification.
Because I'm worried about that action verb that the town is doing something.
Sure. Yes.
Because that's not their.
That's not happening. You're absolutely right. Yeah.
And in all previous reports, the municipalities have been clear they don't want this responsibility. And DFS has been clear they don't want them to have that responsibility of filing or collecting those energy permits.
But that's what the law is now.
Pardon?
That's what the law is now, is that they are collecting, they're filing.
They're not responsible for enforcement.
They're not
They're
responsible
just,
for enforcement.
they just have to collect it and file it,
But they are responsible for.
collecting it and filing it.
Yes.
As part of their building permit.
They just file it in the land records.
Yeah, they file it in the land records, right?
It's not all of them.
If somebody shows up at their office with a certificate, they are required to file it in the land records. They're not required to go looking for it.
That's what I'm saying.
Yes. Peter?
Thank you. Can we scroll back to the top of this?
Sure.
So, I mean, you mentioned verification activities. What's the perception of what that is? I mean, you said it's vague, but.
Yeah, it's intentionally vague here with the idea that evolves over time as everybody gets more comfortable with the idea of energy code verification activities. I would say.
Is that a building inspection? Is it looking at the records, the town records? I mean, what is the?
I think that could take many shapes. So it could be, again, like in a short term, it could just be, hey, we're tracking these certificates and that's our like verification right now that something's happening. The next step could be a remote plan review, and then the step further would be some form of on-site inspection or accepting third-party auditor services as, you know, somebody who was on site, sort of verifying some of these characteristics.
And so then, as far as agency having jurisdiction, I mean, by all apparent measures, you know, what we're talking about is Department of Fire Safety. Is that, so are we saying Department of Fire Safety is going to have
Division.
responsibility?
Yeah, in this logic model, for all intents and purposes, I would say DFS is the age.
And then what is the use of, is this going to be part of the report or? You know,
For, this is
Just for
our DOE grant activity outside of anything we've done for this working group. We just thought this would be helpful to sort of kickstart the conversation about.
If it would be useful, if this working group is interested in using this as part of this report, we're more than happy to share.
Yeah.
It's the Building Energy Code Working Group's report, like,
Right.
not the department's or anyone else's.
So, Matt, then Chris.
I was just going to follow up on his question about the verification activities. I was going to ask, what the difference between the verification activities listed in the middle of the top row versus the verification activities at the far right of the third row?
Yeah, so typically, and there would be a narrative associated with this that would describe some of the nuance and detail you can't really plug into a visual. But yes, it would just be an evolution of what that is, right? What those services are. So I should have been more clear that in my mind is, you know, a plan review or on-site inspections as opposed to an initial verification, maybe just being tracking the
Could be a source
certificates in the central.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Just as for context setting, I just want to make, is it clear, so like 10 of our 27 towns don't have zoning. That means there is no building permit in those towns, right? You've had to pull a septic, and you just have to get septic and well approved. Is that broadly understood? Because I just remember I just heard somebody say, you get the certificate when you issue the building permit, or you track it that way. I guess, is it clear that a lot of our towns, there is no permit? They may not even know that a house has been started?
Oh.
Is that probably?
Yeah.
I think generally speaking, Vermonters don't know that. And because we always get asked, why is it so hard to track how many homes have been built in the region? It's like, because 10 of our 27 towns don't even issue permits. We have to go on 911 data. It's a really torturous process, but is that right? Okay.
You beat me to the question because the box to the left, the orange box, you know, what is the permit database? I mean, there is no permit database. So that's the challenge because it's, if anything, it's handled town to town and some apparently better than others. And I looked at 1 acre and 10 acre towns in Windham County, and there's 16 1 acre towns with no zoning and 6 10 acre towns. So, yeah, but
Well, the only lever that we have is I think, is the septic permit, right?
Yep.
If you build a house, you're going and you put in a septic system.
So A&R is it?
there you go.
I just saw you anymore.
Wait, check to see if they're on part of the. Yeah, I mean, that would be the only kind of statewide management of it, but it wouldn't necessarily be bad. You know, I mean, I'm trying to, I think about all the different towns and how they collect data.
Yeah.
You know, that there is more of a statewide system there.
Right.
Yeah.
Not wanting to make work for anyone, but.
No.
So we'll incentivize people not to put in septic systems.
Yeah. Right, you know? There's a few probably, I'm sure. But then we'll go to the unpermitted ones, right? Yeah. Sorry. Oh, and then down at the bottom, you're defining the difference between owner occupied and non-owner occupied, and I didn't know why we needed to do that. Yeah, right-hand side of.
Oh, because owner occupied single family are not under DFS jurisdiction.
Neither are.
Rentals are.
Everything except owner occupied single family are currently under.
So owner occupied regardless of what its use is. Got
If it's rental.
Answer my question, or I answer my own question. Yep, got it. Okay.
Other questions about the flow chart? Andy?
Sandy wants to present a different
Well,
way of looking
I
at
just
this.
wanted to point out a couple of confusions that I found reading it. And if this is, if you would rather that I speak at the end of the meeting, I'm glad to.
I think we're doing all right.
Okay, so I'm gonna be super quick. So to be clear, fire safety does have jurisdiction right now over duplexes and rentals along with commercial buildings. And the idea is to, I think, to make big changes in that realm and pull along owner-occupied single-family homes is a trickle-down benefit. So when I looked at this chart, I think it's a great start, really great start, but there were some, so what this is suggesting, just by using different font colors, is to break it down.
Hey,
whether it's-
I'm sorry, Sandy, is there any way that this can be shared? So that those of
I
us.
did email it to Richard. I did email it to Richard.
Possibly.
It did,
Let's see if we can
last night.
put it
Richard.
up.
Yeah,
Or is it on the website? Kelly, do you know?
No, it's not.
so the idea would be to think about all buildings, to think about the duplexes and the rented buildings, and then the single owner occupied single family homes in the other red. And then also to break out, I think it's important to distinguish an action versus an outcome. This puts together things from the last year's report and recommendations that BBRA and AIA have made in the past. This is really just talking about the format rather than the points within this chart right now. But what I'd like to suggest is breaking out across this page, kind of general authority administration and then baseline projects and then advanced projects. The idea might be that the baseline projects might be a lot easier to administer, but the advanced projects might be voluntary or in some municipalities require that they actually have a consultant because they're performance-based compliance. Let's see, so coming down with some of these other, so again, I'm sharing it mostly as a format suggestion, but last year in the report and then also in recommendations, the idea is to get rid of the current certificate system, but as this fire safety database comes on board, when a person's applying for a construction permit, there would be another open up chart that you fill in for energy code compliance. Then when you're closing out the project, it would just turn into a certificate. And even if single family homes are not under fire safety jurisdiction, they could be included in that. But it's very clear that even a duplex or rented home already needs to ask for a building permit. So it'd be so easy just to add a little, pop-up page where you fill in your information. If you're a baseline project, it's just pass or fail. And then it's recorded in the archive system with the benefits that Zach mentioned about being able to use the data later. I hope this makes sense. I'm sorry I'm jumping around. And then while I also included the model for energy code administration that I started working on last month. Richard has seen this, but that is really breaking out what fire safety already has jurisdiction over and then theoretical what it could look like for owner-occupied single-family homes. Thank you. I feel like I've spoken out of turn, so.
Sandy, I didn't, We didn't see this
You didn't?
last night,
I
no.
thought I said that.
No, you attached two documents, but this is not one of them, so.
Andrew's sending it to you right now. I'm so sorry. I probably didn't send it.
Okay, so for folks who are trying to follow and we don't have it, we'll get it up on the, we'll make sure we get it over, Agent Kelly and put it on the website.
I'm sorry, Zach. I thought you got that. Yes.
Procedurally, I'm just trying to think about how to use it. So Richard, you and Zach have been the ones burning into like the
Subject for
process.
That's a trick, that's a hook.
That's the only thing that.
You want to mull it over? I personally can't look at that flow chart and then look at this version and say, oh, I can put the two together, or I know, I would need to know which ones to put together.
Peter and Chris, can, we can.
So first question would be, do you intend for this or the flow chart to be included in the report to the legislature?
We haven't gotten that far yet.
Yeah.
Then
This is
there's
just,
no need to answer your question.
And for those of us who still can't see this document, it's really frustrating to try to be part of the conversation when we don't have what you're talking about. So if we could hold off on any further conversation until those of us who aren't there can see the document, that would be great.
Point well taken. Yeah, it was a glitch that it didn't get in time to be included in the materials and up on the website. So we'll remedy that in the next 24 hours. Chris and then Peter.
We do appear to have found a hook.
Okay.
Not to drag another agency into this, but I think, does DC, just a quick question, does DC, I'm trying, they distinguish between new septic permits and existing, don't they?
I have to go look at their database to tell you.
So that is a common thread, somebody pulling a septic and well permit, and then also potentially a sewer hookup permit. That's the common agency where that would know if something is getting built, or somebody would find.
How many? Interesting. No.
So I don't know how that manifests itself, but as far as like outreach, education, there may be they're not a heavy lift potentially. I'm not suggesting they administer anything, but that could be the potential hook.
I'm the administrator.
I have an add-on to that.
Kelly.
A&R does include the requirement for the building energy standards in their permit list, for that reason, so.
Great, okay,
It
good.
is there.
That would be a good way to compare what percentage, I guess, or logging
More
certificates for.
statistically than anything, I would think, is where you go with that stuff.
Yeah.
Septic and potable water are probably going to show up 9.99% of the time.
Colin, this is hand raised.
Colin, thank you.
I hate to dampen the enthusiasm for the 99.99, but as someone who works in places that have municipal services, you have one wastewater permit that covers 42 houses, which will play hell with your numerator and denominator to include the number of homes we've built in the last year on recently constructed water or sewer that have been redone. So I appreciate the backdoor theories and thoughts, but I really think that we're barking up a bad tree. At first I was like, just let them go. But if it's starting to gain momentum, we need to really look.
Yeah, it's always good to have the facts interrupt the theory. Okay, thank you.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, please.
Thanks, you.
Regarding the flow chart from EFG
Yeah.
and the alternate document. Even if I were to agree with everything in both of these documents, could you, correct me if I'm wrong, but the EFG flow chart pertains to the energy code only, not the prospect of the building code, because
Correct.
the building code is the prospect of a statewide building code outside of the scope of work for the EFG DOE grant studies?
It is.
So that's one difference between these two documents.
Although charge 2, just a point of clarification, is focused on RBs and CBs. It's charge 3 that's focused on the IRC.
Right.
But yes, where the DOE grant is solely focused on the energy code.
Okay.
Good question.
Okay, other discussion, comments, questions on the flow chart? Thank you. Once again, everyone likes to edit, not that many people like to write. So as the writers, you get the benefit of a lot of feedback, but thank you for plunging on and giving us something to respond to. Does that pretty much complete the review on that? I don't know if Zach or Richard, you have something more?
You mean number 4?
Yeah.
We don't, but we thought that it would be an opportunity if there is more feedback, input from other members here regarding potential transition to a comprehensive program for RBs and CVs at DFS, including potential funding sources. This would be the opportunity to raise that and open it up for
I
discussion.
don't know. You want to go to Michael DeRocha?
Yeah, that's especially here.
Thank you.
All right.
Good afternoon, Mr. DeRocher.
How are you, sir? Can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
Yep.
Sorry, I couldn't be there face to face. I'm in California at the ICC annual business meeting. Before I make some comments, some corrections about some of the stuff that's been stated here, I first want to take just a second and introduce a couple folks that I had joined me today. Mandy Worcester is our public safety policy advisor, and I invited her to sit in on this meeting. So Mandy will be joining these calls with me, and I also have Landon Wheeler. He is our Springfield district manager, and he does a lot of work with some of our boards and is my right-hand man on code and standards issues, and he's great in some policy matters as well. So I have these two folks on with me. So I think that what I want to do is, number one, the IRC, just to put that to rest. I cannot adopt, even if I was directed to by the legislature, it would be a disservice and irresponsible to adopt the IRC as it sits. That standard has to be assessed and evaluated to match up with the way that we are currently operating in our division regarding permits, inspections, and requirements. There's all kinds of different issues within the IRC that need to be evaluated and addressed. So that is why my 2 cents is this. I need time with this work group to assess whether that IRC can be adopted. Are there certain chapters in the IRC we can use that we would benefit from? But that needs a thorough assessment before I can just adopt it. It's not just something I'm going to arbitrarily just adopt. That could create all kinds of issues with us internally. So there is some thought process with this adoption of the IRC. So I'll start with that.
Sure. Mike, can you say just a little bit like what kinds of things vary so that how Vermont varies from like the generic IRC?
Most states go through the IRC and amend it in some capacity. They either delete chapters. We're both an NFPA and an ICC state. There's numerous references in the IRC to the NFPA codes, and we need to see if what conflicts exist there. The IRC has a sprinkler system requirement for 1 and 2 family dwellings. The energy efficiency section, for example, does not mesh with public services RBs. So there's all kinds of different requirements in there that may not work here in Vermont. That needs to be looked at. What is a design professional used in the IRC? Do we have design professionals? Architects under 26 VSA don't stamp 1 and 2 family dwellings. The drawing. So who is this design professional that's going to be designing all this? Are contractors capable of building to the IRC? And I'm going to tell you, maybe not. Can our inspectors inspect to the IRC? What kind of training do I have to provide to my staff? The list goes on and on. Those are just some of the top high level things that I need to look at internally. And then toss in the housing affordability section or discussion on top of this. What's that going to do to our permit process? Is it going to slow down our permit process? You know how many duplexes we run into that are under construction with no permit now? What are we going to do when we run into a duplex that's under construction? And now we tell this person, you're going to have to hire a design professional to draw up plans. What's that going to look like in the management of this system? So there's a lot of stuff that I want to have the chance to be transparent with everybody and discuss as a group. So I'm not anti-IRC. I serve on the ICC Fire Service Membership Governing Council. I'm very familiar with ICC, and there's some benefits to it, ISO ratings, this kind of stuff. So I get it, but we also want to do it right. And that's going to be my pitch on the IRC for now.
Great, thank you. I mean, it's just helpful to hear the nuts and bolts side. Thank you.
Yeah. And, I do recall, I don't want to just be negative here, but last year we had discussions about how communications was taking place within the committee. So I just want to express some concern on my end that I have received so many emails, documents, emails with attachments, and so forth outside the purview of what's being presented in this work group that I can't keep up with reading all those documents, recommendations, suggestions. And some of them are like, there's only 3-4 people listed on the email. So it's not this whole committee group that is seeing all this communication that's going on. And maybe I'm guilty of it too, to some degree or whatever, but I'm just letting you know that communication that is part of this findings, that it please be presented to you, Chair, so that it can be then relayed to the group as an entity. That's all I feel guilty that I haven't been able to keep up with all this stuff. So the presentations that are given here, I'm trying to play catch up in my own mind as to what's being presented here. So I just wanted to mention that quickly.
Sure. Well, thanks for that. Right. I mean, I think everything needs to come through the committee. Otherwise, it's not an entirely public and open process. People will be missing parts of the conversation outside. So, yeah, if people can be mindful about, I think probably limiting the number of documents and then sending them in to the co-chairs so that we can make sure they get put into our record and then posted so that we don't end up with someone saying, I don't have that handout. Thank you for that.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, thank you.
I'd suggest also that documents get sent to EFG, which is the hired staff. So Richard and Zach as well.
So does this all fall under the open meeting law? So those emails that he's gotten technically are public knowledge and we could see them?
I think
I just want to know who to send stuff to.
Well,
Who are the 4 people that we're sending stuff to?
Senator Bray, me, Richard, and Zach.
Okay.
right, and so open meeting law, we have Ms. Chakowski on the call, so she can probably help us if other people can, I want to make sure we don't unintentionally run afoul of it. It's when you start having a quorum on your.
Well, we don't know that based on what he's, and I'm not in the mud, I'm just saying, if other people have been sending him stuff with this conversation in mind, then we are running afoul in some fashion of that public meeting law if we don't have that data that he's getting.
I think when it's circulating to enough people.
Right, when it's circulating to a quorum of the committee, then it's public, as I understand.
Yeah.
Then it's public document.
Not sure Mike is done yet either, so.
The other thing is, sorry, just that, we don't want to bind everything up, like you can't be emailing back, having a conversation through email. It's when it starts to become a bigger conversation, it's a quorum, then we have an obligation to make sure that it gets into the record. But the other thing, just by way of reassurance, is anything we're going to act on, whether it starts out as a group conversation outside of the committee, it needs to come onto the table and be part of our agenda and all the rest. So everything will get vetted in a public way. So thank you for people to try to manage that. Okay, Mr. DeRosa, back to you.
All right, thank you. So I just want to also mention that currently under, when we talk about this comprehensive energy efficiency program, I just want to raise the issue, which all of you are well aware of, that under Title 30 right now, Chapter 2, there is a law in place already mandating compliance with the RBs and CBs, which everybody here knows. And under Title 30, certificates of compliance are required to be posted. And, so I guess what my purpose of this, of reminding folks of this, is we already have a law in place that requires compliance with these RBs and CBs. And there's actually a compliance certificate that needs to be signed by either the architect, the design professional, and an engineer, or a lack of any of those, it has to be signed by the builder. And it's going to be posted on the site. And so with that in mind, when you look at those certification forms, people are attesting to compliance with the RBs and the CBs when they fill that certificate out. So, to me personally, layering on fire safety or energy efficiency inspectors, energy efficiency managers, putting all this into a plan review process and so forth, when apparently we have low compliance rates already, when the law's in place, the certificates are being posted. And I did offer to this committee the opportunity to somehow engage with you on the electronifying, if it's a word, to try to manage these certificates and link the certificates of compliance with the buildings. And I did speak with our IT folks and stuff, and we can work with you on doing this. But I just bring this up because you already have the law in place, and we keep discussing about all this comprehensive energy efficiency compliance program. Why are we having failure rates when people are attesting on these compliance certificates? So to me, that means that either the builders or whoever it is not building to that standard. I don't even know what y'all are doing for validating compliance. I'm sorry, I'm not an energy efficiency person. But I just wanted to bring that to light, and then I'm going to quickly just go down through a couple other items. I wanted to discuss, there's been talk here about the Division of Fire Safety taking over the rulemaking process for public service as part of this comprehensive program. I'm just being honest with you. I'm already 3 code cycles behind on the building code. We're still under the 2015 IBC. I would be doing a disservice to this entity by taking on additional rulemaking when we're in the process of rulemaking to update our elevator safety rules, the electrical safety board rules, the plumbing licensing board rules, and the ADA rules. So those are 4 other subcategory of rulemaking that I'm already in the process of working on. And taking on this would be a major heavy lift when right now, I think the public service has already done a pretty decent job managing the rulemaking process for the RBs and CBs through the Future Energy Group. So I just want to raise that issue again. I'm a broken record, but opposing that we take on added rulemaking here in the Division of Fire Safety. And Zach compiled a list of like an anticipation of how many new single-family homes are built. The committee already knows that I'm not going to support, being the Director of Fire Safety, expanding our jurisdictional authority in the single-family owner-occupied homes. I'm not doing that. But when you're looking at the budget that I proposed at the last meeting, there are some things that were not included in that. One of them was single-family owner-occupied homes. If you use 1,300 homes that are being built, and you're making the assumption that it's 4 hours to do whatever it is for an energy efficiency validation report, include the travel time and report writing, I don't know how many inspections that one would expect the Division of Fire Safety to do, but I can tell you that it would take a heap load of inspectors in order to manage that residential side of the picture, not including all the equipment, the several years it would take us to even onboard, to even do stuff under our jurisdiction. And the reality of it is, and I'm not trying to be negative to this group, I'm talking about the reality of onboarding people, training them, equipping them, training them. That's a massive undertaking. I don't even know if I have personal office space to bring on 8 to 10 new employees, whether I even have the office space to do it. So I just want to, again, can you still hear me?
Yeah. Unfortunately.
Very clearly.
I'm not trying to be a broken record here. This has major implications on the Division of Fire Safety.
Sure. So I appreciate you raising them. Let me just interrupt for a moment to just check in with Jim Bradley. Do you have a question you want to ask along the way that Mike is for his presentation, or wait till he's done?
I definitely wait till he's done, sir.
Okay, thank you. So back to you, Mike.
Yeah, so I have from day one supported energy efficiency awareness, training, education, and I believe that you build from the bottom up rather than creating this big bureaucracy and red tape that comes with millions of dollars down to a level of contractors, that we need to make sure that our industry can meet that demand, that we have qualified people that are out there doing this work before you start mandating what they're going to do when they can't do it. I guess that's, the point that I would make. And it's not that I don't believe in building into our, because it's a price tag comes with building a house that'll last 30 years, 40 years versus a cheap house that'll last for 10 years. So I get there is a benefit to building resiliency into our structures. We can be part of this awareness, and to what degree we can do training and that kind of stuff. I did earmark some money out of our 1UP grant once we received notification of acceptance to that grant, I did put some funding aside for training. So I'll just stop and get off my soapbox there, but I just, I know the group's excited about the energy efficiency side of stuff. But this has a serious impact on our division. And, Mike, our commissioner, we have so many other safety challenges right now. School safety, teaching how schools react to active shooters. There's all kinds of different arenas that the Division of Fire Safety is in. Energy storage systems, all kinds of different things that we're in. And, our commissioner, is going to be looking at me saying, why are we going and trying to bring in these resources when we have a resource need over here where there's imminent risk to life safety for our Vermonters? And so that's, it's a matter of priorities. Thank you.
Yep, thank you very much. Kelly?
I have a follow-on question, Michael, with what you just said. It seems to me the existing buildings under your jurisdiction, for the reasons you just laid out, you focus on health and safety. If you were to get jurisdiction over single-family homes, wouldn't that also be the priority? That, I think there's a lot of states that they never get to the energy standards and inspection of energy standards because they have so much time in the home and they're going to look at health and safety. So I just wonder if we would even really get there, because it seems like that would and maybe should always be the priority.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, right now, we just took on with 4 inspectors, 222 health officers we're doing in the rental health and safety arena, and with 4 inspectors. And you can't imagine the stuff that we're running into in there. And I would also add that with added programs comes all the things like HR, the stress it puts on HR staff, administration staff, and I know I'm speaking to the choir here, but administration, finance, grant management, every employee that I add on, any new positions I add on, my indirect fee rate goes up. There's just all kinds of different program challenges that we are faced with when we implement new policies. And I'm just asking for this group to understand that I'm just not a negative person about energy efficiency. I may sound it, but I don't think that everyone fully understands how much of an impact this is on the Division of Fire Safety.
So thank you for your concern. I don't think anyone here feels like you're being negative. I think you're trying to warn us about practical consequences. So good to be hearing them early while we're thinking and planning than further down the line. So thank you.
Yeah, and if I could just add to Mike, I appreciate what you're saying. And the idea of educating builders is really what we're trying to get at. How do we get builders to understand the implications of the levels of insulation that are typical now, the levels of air sealing that are typical, and the impacts that those elements have on the longevity, of the durability of the structure, and the health and safety for the occupants. So what we're trying to figure out here is not how to make DFS's life more difficult. What we're trying to figure out is how to improve the sort of level of practice and the standard of practice in the building industry. When you talk about just providing guidance and training, that's great. we've had these RB's codes, these residential building energy codes, now for more than 25 years, and yet compliance is still pretty low. Awareness among consumers is very low, and awareness among builders is still certainly not 100%. So that's our challenge here, is we're trying to figure out how to improve compliance, not with a hammer or a stick, but with some combination of standards, compliance requirements, and education and training. So that's.
No, I can respect that, and I think what you bring up a good point, and that is today's buildings are going to be tomorrow's problems. So, you know, we have one chance. I always tell our plan reviewers, you have one chance to make this right, and that is in the plan review phase of the construction.
Right.
And if you can have the builders and have well-drawn plans, then you end up with better buildings at the end of the day. So I can appreciate that.
Yep.
Thank you, sir.
Right. Thanks, Mike.
Jim Bradley.
Yes, thank you. Can everyone hear me?
Yep.
Okay, great. You know, I do support a lot of what Mike just brought up about the fact that Division of Fire Safety, you know, if you're just trying to pin things in and say, okay, you have the ability to have all this increase with current staff, current resources, it's just not possible, you know. But the thing is, what is so challenging as a builder, as an inspector, is to see that our building industry in Vermont lacks the ability to properly build a system to govern the industry, you know, and that's all facets. So to say that this energy code, the RB's code, should be a standalone, separate from a building code, separate from inspections, enforcement, education, and everything else is incorrect. You know, the energy code should be something that is housed within. But see, we have climate goals, we have efficiency goals, and I get that, I support that, but yet we're trying to do it in a way that puts the biggest risk upon builders and consumers. Because what we have in place is something that we're increasing standards because, hey, we always got to get more efficient, higher R values, lower U factors, everything else. Let's get a better assembly, hopefully better air quality, but more importantly, durability and health and safety is the big thing inside of our buildings. But in the process, we have these laws that are passed. We're part of these working groups that are saying, how can we get this done better? All these different organizations don't currently have the resources that they need. OPR, I'm a part of that as well in the advisory committee, but OPR, you know, they're not set up to design a certification and then enforce that certification on their own. And that is something that is usually housed better within DFS. But Mike, I understand the resources, the personnel, the finances aren't there for you to be able to do that. So how do we continue to push forward then? So increasing energy standards, but yet not requiring better education. And I get builders that contact me. Last week, I was deposed again for another violation of the 2015 Energy Code, RB's code. At the same time, later that night, I had a prominent builder who was asking me how he could skirt the RB's requirements in the easiest way. And I said, do you understand what you're asking? You know, you're going to end up in court, you know, and it may not be today, but eventually you will, and you can't ask the homeowner to sign off on their responsibilities. And yet we have something that's very defunct right now. We have good intentions, but we lack a lot of the, you know, moving forward. And hopefully this is what this group can help solve and move us towards. But we can't just pass more stringent standards without the proper underpinnings or scaffolding in place, as we have said so many times before. And expect that we're going to get great results. Expect that we're going to meet our climate goals for 2030 and 2050 and everything else. We can't get there. And in fact, we do create more failed assemblies in the process. So even Keith Levison at Elcar this last time, when asked, okay, why weren't certain things in place ready to put in builders' hands, you know, from the handbook to the code and everything codified? And he said a great point. He said, this is very challenging. There's a lot of detail here. And, you know, in that 12-month period from 2023 in June to 2024, it was a lot to handle. And that still is being navigated at this point in time. But then to expect a builder to be responsible for those details, that they're trying to build and make affordable housing and, basically fulfill that gap or fill that gap of the builders where there's not enough builders. It's just things are disconnected. And the builders that I'm talking to are seasoned, have been around long enough to where they're saying it's no longer worth the risk to them. And so if we start seeing an exodus of builders because of the liability, or fast forward to when there's going to be more responsibility upon insurance companies to pay for these defects, and then they start to have the exodus out of our small state, that becomes catastrophic. And it's happened in California. It happened in Texas a few years ago with mold issues, where the insurance companies, basically didn't shut down the whole industry, but there was a huge deficit in the ability of moving forward. And we run the risk by not getting this right now. And so I just say that there's got to be a better solution. And it's basically, if there's going to be a recommendation to the legislature, is how do we allocate? We must allocate the right agency with the right resources, including money and finances, and also personnel, to be able to make this thing run, and not put the onus and responsibility upon the builders to follow the law, as was correctly stated, it is law. Follow the law and get it right, but you're saying, but how do I get there as a builder? And yet I'm responsible for all this, for a more stringent code without the proper support. And that would be what I would add in all this. Thank you.
Is it, if we had a full-blown inspection for energy work on construction now, would that be a useful thing to you all? Like, you be out in the field, someone come by, I don't know to what degree your experience with inspection is, that it's cooperative and educational as opposed to like just remedial, like that's wrong, here's a situation where you have some choices and they are in essence like a coach when visiting.
Minute you have compliance, you have.
Well, let's let Jim Bradley go.
Senator Bray, I agree with you completely in that question, in the sense of, I think what is most needed is that collaborative effort. Vermont is a cottage-based industry type of state where people, in a small place can do a lot by interrelating or interconnecting or networking with one another, and having that type of relationship developed with a person who is possibly a rater or somebody who is a consultant that can help assist that builder of, navigate the process of understanding RVs better, but also making assembly that is more affordable, more durable, and healthy and safe for the occupants. I think that's huge. And it's that I've done that. I've done it with many builders that are say, okay, our next house, we're coming to you for the new design, not because I have it all worked out, but I can help them navigate the process and let them make those choices. So yes, 100%, having a type of inspection that's not just the stick situation of pass or fail, having the inspection or the consulting or the opportunity to collaborate with the builders to choose the assemblies and understand why. And that comes with education of, this is building science. This is how the building as a system operates. So they get it and understand that's why, we need to go this direction.
Sure. Well, great. Well, I know from a very different arena, meat inspection that the Agency of Agriculture does for slaughterhouses, that in essence, the inspectors have become like technical consultants, so that people, before they get to a point of inspection, actually ask for like pre-inspection to help them figure their way along. And it became, as the word you used, collaborative. So Craig and Colin, then Mr. Wabi.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
I haven't said much in this committee, but last year, some of you may remember, I brought up I think this is the appropriate time to bring it up again, just to me, the natural synergy that we have in this state going for us, which is we do have an energy efficiency utility network. And I still believe that, Mike has brought up a lot of the concerns that he's bringing up again about his capacity, what the history is of his agency, how he operates, how he's behind on all these other things. And Efficiency Vermont, in both conversations here and other conversations that I'm aware of that we've had, and I'm sure this applies to Burlington Electric and the other energy efficiency utilities, don't want to get into the enforcement business because they don't see that as what they do. That said, to me, the synergy between these two groups of people that we already have in place where we could have people from the energy efficiency utilities come under Mike's rubric, if you will, in some capacity where it's less burdensome for him to do this work, seems like it's a great opportunity here to deal with. And I'm not sure how all the money would flow. Clearly, the energy efficiency utilities would need to be funded for that work. I think their people could rotate in and out of positions to do this kind of enforcement related advising. And it would also give additional synergy in not only education, but in allowing them to do what the energy efficiency people want to do, which is advise people to make better buildings while they're ostensibly enforcing the code. So I'm just going to go back to that point again, that I see that as really an opportunity here, given all the gaps we have in the state that we have to deal with on a lot of funding issues going forward. So I just wanted to bring that up one more time.
Great. Quick question before we go into Colin. Matt Sharp, do you have that, well, you just heard what Craig was walking through. Do you have those conversations at EVT?
Hi, good afternoon. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Yes.
So yeah, there are lots of conversations at EVT about how we can support builders. I think what the biggest challenge has been that we support builders who come to us looking for support. And so I think at our peak, you know, maybe 5-10 years ago, we were maybe serving about 30% of the market, and the rest just didn't want to participate. And so for those who come, we have great services to provide. I think the challenge really where we are, and this is a great conversation Craig's bringing up, is maybe there's an opportunity for what this committee's charge is to make a recommendation for a transition to DFS. Maybe there's some thinking around how all these organizations could work together that keep the burden off of DFS and share it with other agencies around the state, like the EEUs. I'm not part of any of those kind of conversations at EVT, but it's a good idea to talk through for sure.
Thanks so much for jumping in. Colin.
Thank you. To answer your previous question about the inspections, just as for most of you probably already know this, and forgive me for repeating it, but normally for a energy inspection, there would be a pre-drywall inspection, then a final inspection. Back 6, 9, 12 years ago, Efficiency Vermont supported homes that were exceeding code. Back then, before the RBs had been revised a bunch of times, it was relatively easy for those of us who cared and wanted to do the right thing to exceed code. We are now at the point where there were a lot of the discussions during the last LCAR where code is at best building practices, and you have to do a lot, and it's not the way things normally have been done in the past. And so there's many more challenges to get to code now, to exceed code and qualify for EVT services. Efficiency Vermont services now is a different kettle of fish. And so I know that we have been building to code for the last handful of years. Before that, we were amongst that 30% that Matt talked about. And I would tell you that there was a tremendous amount of symbiotic learning. There was teaching, there was the education piece. It was good to have those knowledgeable people out there on job sites regularly checking, providing that third-party check, but also to help educate and keep things moving forward. And so I think, like Craig was saying and Matt was just saying, I understand what Mike's been saying all along, that as he's currently outfitted, that he can't take it all on. I think it would be wonderful if the recommendations of this group and the solution does involve multiple parties, and having Efficiency Vermont as part of that education piece, maybe part of the inspection piece, the different pieces there. But that education piece does come part and parcel with those inspections, in my experience, particularly 5 or 10 years ago, like Matt was saying.
Thank you. Can you remind me, because I don't know quite what the rules of the road are out there, but in terms of eligibility for support from Efficiency Vermont, it's when you exceed current code, is that correct? And so as the code floor moves up, more projects lose their eligibility, even though they would have once been eligible because they were exceeding a prior code.
Correct. A house that I built to code now, as of probably 3 years ago, the ability to exceed code and qualify for services probably left the barn for most people who do, I don't know what the right term for it is, traditional building assemblies. Not trying to belittle or say anything's right or wrong, but for a lot of us that do traditional building could no longer easily exceed code and therefore regularly qualify for services.
I see, Matt, you have your screen back on. Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to bring up that it's certainly not Efficiency Vermont's desire to be an enforcer of energy code. One of the beautiful things about the way we do work is we work very well with folks to help them do what they want to do to meet their goals of their projects. And as soon as you bring in an enforcement piece to that, it changes the relationship significantly. Not to say we can't be part of the solution,
Right.
but just wanted to bring that up.
Okay, great.
That's all I was.
Richard?
Craig's got his hand up again.
Okay.
Oh.
Craig, is your hand still up or?
Yeah, I can wait. I just put it back up again, but I can wait if Mr. Wabi wants to speak, but I do have one other quick comment.
All right.
My question actually goes back to where I was when I started. Today goes back to the fact, and Mike brought it up, that's the only reason I'm coming back to it, is that in 2017 or 2018, and I'm probably wrong, there was a Title 30, chapters 1 and 2, did reference a whole building energy code, did reference a whole compliance initiative, and did reference a whole energy plan back then. And I don't know if it's not in place anymore or nobody read it, but there's something that is very similar to what we're all talking here that Mike brought up that I was going to ask you about later. So,
Okay. Can anyone deconfuse that a little bit?
Yeah.
Like, so you're saying it seems like there's already statute in place?
if you take a look, Title 30, Chapter 1 actually references the Chapter 1, doing this off memory from earlier, but Chapter 1 actually references the adoption of a code per se. It also references the inception plan and putting a plan together. It references training. It references all these pieces that we're talking about now. Go ahead.
I think that was the code compliance plan that we had to do.
I don't know.
That Energy Futures Group
I
was.
think Richard's talking about what's in statute now, that the enabling statute for RVs and CVs, which is Title 30, Chapter 2. Sections 51, 52.
Yeah.
Look at
That's
Chapter 1.
Chapter 2.
Chapter 1 is appointment, general powers and duties for public service. Chapter 2 is building energy.
Right. There was two parts to that, and that was my confusion, that they've already got a plan and things in place for.
Yeah, well, there is a plan in place that authorizes the adoption of RVs and CVs, but there isn't really a compliance plan. There's no penalty. There's no enforcement included in it.
But he just said we didn't need enforcement. He said we need to work together.
Yes. I'm not
And
proposing
you just said-
enforcement.
No, hold on. You just said enforcement and somebody else said compliance. And so So we're either gonna be cooperative, because a coach from an inspection or compliance initiative does not exist. It doesn't exist. But go ahead. Good luck.
All I said was these things don't exist in the statute. That's all I'm saying.
There was a compliance plan that we did do, and I think EFG actually helped us with it. So we did the plan and it's out there, but it was a
There wasn't a
long time
compliance
ago.
plan.
Is that part of statute or is that?
Yes,
Yes,
it's under chapter 2. It's section 54.
I thought so. That's why I'm wondering
Yeah.
if it already exists, what we're talking about.
Okay, so chapter 2, section 54?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So
It probably included things like the town clerks providing information on.
No, Department of
There's positions and how you would do compliance, but it takes funding and positions, so.
So thank you for saying that. Now I have a little reading. Let's back up.
This was put in Department of Public, DPS.
Public
Service, I'm sorry.
Yes.
Public service.
Yep.
This was put in there. And I'm gonna say it was in
We did a plan. It's out
15
there.
and 17.
It was-
the whole thing.
Due February 2027, 17, yes.
So let's Craig finish, then Chris.
Just wanted to respond to two comments. One that Colin mentioned, or I just want to make a comment based on what Colin said about the delta between how Efficiency Vermont gives their incentives based on from where you are and what you can meet versus code. That is another huge issue that's going to need to be dealt with as we move towards a net zero, what we're calling a net zero capable code, which is yet to be defined. But the fact that we are making the argument that I think it's important that we maintain incentives from the energy efficiency sector for builders, and that delta is going to go away. So that's also an issue in the background here we need to deal with. And to Matt's point, again, about not wanting to be in the enforcement business, I get that, but I just want to reiterate the way I would see this working is we would have the technical capability from the energy efficiency utilities with folks wearing a different hat for a period of time and integrating that work through Mike's organization potentially in a way that was less burdensome to Mike is my sort of thought process on this. So you could sort of satisfy everybody's concerns.
I remember a lot of coaches, some of them were not always fun to work with, so. Good sprints at the end of practice. So Chris.
Sorry, I had to leave to get to a commission meeting back home. So this is not a thing for the RPC, I'm just speaking from my experience, but since we're on this item 2, which is a big weighty one. So so you know my background, I'm a regional planning commission director, but my dad was a builder. I grew up in a building family. I did business in Calvert County, Maryland, where I was deputy director of planning and zoning. I oversaw the division that was inspections and permits. And I'm educated as a landscape architect. So I'm just going to share that in the absence of, and I'm not saying where I'm advocating for a builder, this is a position of the RPCs, but in the absence of a building code, I don't know how we make this work. Because I'm trying to picture my inspectors in Maryland go into a house and just looking at energy efficiency, if they're also then seeing structural issues, plumbing issues, gas issues. I'm aware my landscape architect had grading issues. Because we keep talking about the building, nothing about the site, and I get that. But what I'm thinking is that if everything else isn't right, I kind of keep thinking that this is a poor metaphor, for lack of a better term. But to the extent that building code is the icing on the cake, I kind of want to know what's in the cake. And am I icing a cake that's going to fall off the plate or wash off the plate? Or is it cattywampus or the big area? Is it structurally sound cake that I'm dumping all this ice on? That's a really bad metaphor. But where I'm trying to go with this is so my inspectors too, yes, they can be very collegial, they can offer advice, but they're also enforcing a code. And if they see a violation, they have to issue a stop work order. So it can't just be, yeah, buddy, next time do better. No, you're enforcing a code. And so there's like a efficiency utility, or I would call it, just growing up, an extension function, act like, university extension, where you call people and ask for your best advice and education, or that kind of collegial outreach and engagement and education about how to do things really well. But that's not the road of a code enforcer, because if they do that, they are breaking the law. They are not doing their jobs if they don't enforce the code. So I don't know how you thread that needle. And then lastly, I do want to just say something about, based on what I've seen as I've looked at homes, as I've owned homes here, as I've seen people look at homes, the stuff that you see that's been done, it's, you might say sometimes it's cute, but no, it's not. I mean, it can be really dangerous. Different gauges of wire going in each other that shouldn't go in each other, plumbing, structural issues. Ideally, there should be eyes on this stuff, and there should be continuing education, like people, those doing the work, looking at the codes to see what the expectation is, because one of the roles of codes is education. And going back to grading, the number of homes I've seen that just have water running right into them makes no damn sense. And given the rains that we have now, probably even the residential code standards for grading probably don't even keep up with what we're getting. Which then you put water into a very well sealed building, not a good scenario. So this whole business of not having permits, not having even the most basic of site plans, not having the most basic, even if it's on a napkin, a grading plan with 2-foot contours or something. I just don't understand how we make all this work. So I'm just trying to make sense of all the effort on the energy code, which I get, and I'm all for energy efficiency. But how do you make the building as an aggregate, as a conglomeration of systems work on a site that also has its own systems in effect? So to conclude, I don't know how Mike could do this. I mean, this at a statewide level, trying to figure this out. But other states have, and other rural states have. I just hope, and I know we've got a framework, a legislative framework that we've got to work within, but just really stepping back and just kind of figuring out what it is that we want to achieve. And if the goal is maximizing energy efficiency in a way that's as responsible as possible, maybe it's less a code and more the engagement and education. Because I feel nervous about really, pushing the code, that energy code, in the absence of the larger building code. So you can throw things at me now if you like.
Thank you, Chris.
Right, so I'm mindful of the time, we're a little past 3, we have about 20 minutes of our own time left, and we need to check in on stakeholder public comment. Well, usually we don't have anyone, so maybe we get to borrow a little of that time back. So Richard, Wabi, you had some stuff that you.
Sandy got a question.
Okay, before we move back onto that, Sandy?
Sandy's fine.
I just wanted to say, New York State started having residential inspectors about 20 years ago. And the first ones, a lot of them were used car salesmen. And it was a program that didn't work very well. But now 20 years later, rural New York has really good inspectors. So I think we do need to take the long view, some ways to do that. One, first focus on duplexes and rentals, because they're already part of an integrated system. There's a long haul to get to the kind of comprehensive inspector that Chris is talking about. And where, for instance, I can't believe this, but in Colorado, there are lath inspections. If you're going to put plaster on or stucco, there's actually a lath inspection. And Connecticut and Rhode Island, Massachusetts, some towns in New Hampshire, there are already these people who are comprehensive, knowledgeable inspectors, that building officials that come on the site. So there will be a trickle-down effect to owner-occupied single-family homes if we can get this started for duplexes and rentals. The second thing, and I know we have this goal of 2030, and I take sustainability incredibly seriously with my work. But if we had a more basic prescriptive code for a short period of time, and I'm taking just a few years, for residential construction, something that is people can, with a minimal amount of training, can comply with, start that feeling of feeling good about complying again, rather than writing it off. And then with incentives, get higher performance. The golden year in Vermont was, I think it was actually before 2008, so it was actually more like 20 years ago, where we had 30% compliance. How? Because base code was really simple. It was so easy to get a 10% that was required to get a free AVT person on site. Bruce Courtois used to come to most of my sites. And he did the 2 visits, he did a free blower door test, and the owner could fill out that certificate with a contractor with pride and stick it on the boiler. And we had a great system starting. But I think the reason why it's fallen apart is we don't have the foundation that our neighboring states have to ease up on the envelope and mechanical requirements. So I feel like if we could create a situation where EVT could come back on site to actually go above a more basic code, then they wouldn't be put in the position of enforcers. That could help solve the gap until we could actually get our building officials trained. My experience is that both builders and building officials are eager learners. I think we could do this. We just have to figure out a way to stage it. Thank you.
Richard and Matt, you both had things that you brought up earlier in the meeting, so we didn't want to miss them. So we wanted to capture them and get them into, even if we didn't resolve things, that we would at least capture them and get them into this meeting's minute.
You want first off?
Who wants to go first?
Sure. I think I was, let's see. Well, we just talked about charge 1 and charge 2. So my comments were about charge 3, which I think we've been hearing over the past hour about the kind of important tie-in with the energy code compliance and the idea of a residential building code. So my comment was that we should not defer all of our response to that charge to next year's report, but include some kind of response to the charge that we consider that should be something that the state enact. So I was suggesting that we include, again, some of the content from last year's report that speaks to why that's important. We could include content about the insurance industry, which we've spoken about in previous meetings, and comparison to other states. And then kind of explain the work that is currently happening with the DFS working group as kind of a preview to, okay, this year we've grappled with this question. We've come to a consensus that it is something that should happen. Next year, we'll share the results of kind of how is this possible and feasible.
Not to speak for Mike DeRocha, but I mean, his working group that's looking at this is very separate. Like, I don't see that this building energy code working group can say, you DFS, no, it should happen. So figure out how it should happen. Like, I feel like what we were saying at the last meeting is let that working group play out, see what their work is, see what their recommendations is and why, and then revisit it next year. So I guess I'm not sure. It sounds like you're saying, no, we should say, No, IRC has to go forward and kind of direct that group. I'm not clear like what, because it's not an offshoot of this group. It's a separate working group that Mike DeRocha's
Yeah.
looking into the IRC.
Yeah, I didn't say IRC, but go ahead.
Sorry.
Oh, I thought you were still talking about the IRC.
Well,
And charge 3 is consider whether or not states should adopt a statewide building code.
Right.
And that's
Right.
what Mike's group is looking into, the IRC.
like that language there was intended to whether we apply a statewide building code which encompass the single-family owner-occupied homes. And so that was the intent behind that language was, should a statewide building code be put across single-family owner-occupied homes as well? And I think Sandy can validate that as well. But that's what the intent of that language charge was. And this group should know that we do have the IBC for 3 units and above. And on our duplexes, we receive structural drawings on the trusses and the floor systems of houses. So it's not just, and these houses get inspected. So they get inspected by the fire marshal, they're inspected by the electrical, they're inspected by the plumbing and heating inspector. So these duplexes that are not under the IRC, they are under NFPA 101 and our Vermont Fire and Building Code amendments. And we do have stamped structural drawings for the trusses and the truss floor systems on these places. So it's not like it's just a blanket 8x11 sheet of paper and somebody puts a scratch note on it. So there is oversight on these 1 and 2 family dwellings. So I just want to offer that for clarity. Thank you.
So I'll just add, last year's report, the very first recommendation from the group in last year's report is to designate DFS as the AHJ over all building construction. So that group did answer the question. I'm saying the new charge is really asking the question again, which has already been answered. So I'm saying we should answer it again and not defer that part of it for next year.
The new charge is to come up with ways to do it. So how to do it, but we're sort of.
For the energy code, yes.
Well, yes, and the building code also. The exact language.
No, charge 3 is consider whether or not the state should adopt a statewide building code. That's charge 3.
I mean, the two are very interrelated, and so I think we should make that part of our report.
Yes, it's just weather.
Okay, weather.
Okay.
A big weather. Okay, thank you. So have that in notes.
You're fine. You know my concerns.
Okay.
Your minutes don't actually, if this is our working group meeting notes, and this is what we're going to follow to put this 151 Building Energy Code Working Group report, know what you're putting in it. And I had referenced Title 30 in my notes. We talked about that. I referenced Act 47 that you already have a report. So we should all be aware of that. My last little question just came up here. You said 21 people voted to accept this?
I think that, so this is just me remembering, I think we had 23 people.
Because the group is only 15 strong.
No, the Act 47, report.
Oh, okay.
We had like 23, it was a big group.
It's in there.
We had like 23. And
No, I thought you were talking the 51.
No,
151
sorry,
or
I was,
this meeting
sorry to be
thing.
unclear. No, it's like that decision about like, okay, we understand the reservations. Mike was very clear about it last year. But because it was, I think to everyone but a couple people, it felt like we hear you, you know, and I think the other thing, and I probably can't say it often enough, we were very explicit about, we're not just asking Mike Shop to take that on. We would, if we were to go that route, we would say, what does it cost? What are the resources? And how do we bring those to him? Because the point is not to create a program. The point would be to create a successful program, you know? So we never thought, well, just stretch your budget or have your staff do more stuff. It was never that kind of a.
So this is due November 15th, if I remember correctly?
Yep,
And where do we go from here?
I believe that's next on the agenda.
Yeah, can we jump into that item because we need to get it supported?
That's in writing. Can
Uh,
I comment?
Yeah, sure, Peter.
Great. So, listening to the discussion, I think that, you know, the position that we're taking is that, you know, supporting training and education, and I think the EUs are, you know, in conjunction with whatever certification programs are probably a great way to accomplish that. In terms of the Department of Public Service, you know, how have you collected, or do you have a good collection of RV certificates across the state, or, you know, what do you think that looks like, your database, what does that look like?
I'd have to look at how many there are, but when we do the compliance study, they find very few certificates that are posted in the
They
house.
got a
So
file.
it's probably, I mean, again, as we talked earlier, we don't have a good permit database and not all towns require permits, so there's no number to know out of how many do we
Yeah, right,
have, right?
What's your percentage?
But I can't remember offhand the number.
Gotcha, but, you know,
But we
so-
do get certificates, yes, we have.
Yeah, I mean, I think that collecting those certificates, you know, is pretty important in terms of compliance. I mean, you know, builders need to file them and we should know where they are. You know, when I think about the residential building energy code, and the fact that the Department of Fire Safety doesn't inspect single-family residential units, I don't see how it really fits with them. Certainly not in today's mode, right? It would require huge changes that Mike has alluded to. And as far as the IRC code, you know, think that, you know, it really is something that's a bigger discussion, and that was the reason why the discussion set, or recommendation 3 to push it, you know, to next year, makes sense to me. So that's, you know, kind of our focus on it at this point.
Great. We should go to Zach here if we're going to get time for him to get through.
Well, and I was actually gonna quickly bring up a question about a potential recommendation to charge 2, which is, we've referenced a few times the conversations that the EUs are having with the Department of Public Service about potentially engaging in new construction for homes, or bringing homes up to code as opposed to only allowing for participation for above code homes. And is that a recommendation that,
That's in the previous report.
that's fair enough. Well, I think there's a question to be had then as part of the outline of whether we should be repeating recommendations from the previous report that haven't had, or that are, you know, not started, or, yeah, I guess that's something we can talk about as we work through the outline, the best way to frame some of this. So let me share the outline we've started. Okay. So yeah, we wanted to quickly walk through the proposed outline. The schedule calls for the report to be drafted within the next week or so and then distributed to the working group. Then we'll discuss that at the meeting next Friday. So,
Our next meeting's Friday, November 1st, so we'll have a draft to review prior to that.
Right.
correct. Yep. And this outline, I would say, generally follows the structure of the Act 47 report, though we've discussed with the PSD trying to keep this higher level, shorter, focus on new recommendations coming out of this working group. So hopefully everybody can get through the primary content without being bogged down in too much detail. With that said, we'd have an executive summary similar to the Act 47 report. That would be a summary of the charges and recommendations from the working group, presenting dissenting opinions and comments as the Act 47 report did. Brief introduction and background on the details of the Act 151 legislation and reference to the work that was done last year through the Act 47 committee. And then in the body of the report, we're proposing really like high level bullet point updates on status and progress since the Act 47 report on those recommendations. So essentially what we walked through in the meeting last time on the 11th, I believe it was. And then an overview of the legislative directive, so a summary of each charge. And then we would get into sort of the main content of the report, which would be the response to the legislative directive. So we talked about charge 1 at the top of this meeting, which was the focus of the meeting on the 11th. Charge 2 is what we've discussed today. I guess it's not clear to me right now what, if any, recommendations are coming out of today's meeting. And then number 3 is the IRC discussion that we've been talking about. And certainly I think that would include referencing the working group that Mike has put together, the items that group intends to address. So a lot of the questions that Mike brought up both today and on the 11th. And so that's what would sort of be the primary structure. Following that would be recommendations. So this is the same way it was set up in the Act 47 report, recommendations for the legislature, and then other more general recommendations that aren't specific to legislative action. And then in an appendix would be a detailed status update for Act 47 recommendations. So there's a table in the executive summary of the Act 47 report. And what we've talked about is kind of taking some of the detail out of that report, but keeping the detailed recommendations, probably keeping the dissenters, but then having a column that would, provide space to have a detailed status update of what's happening with those recommendations, because, I think it's important to point out when what we spent the last meeting talking through is there has been a lot of progress on a lot of those recommendations. And so I think, that's good to acknowledge and remind legislature about. So that's the structure of the outline. So yeah, if folks have any comments about what might be. Yes.
So people will be reviewing, there's committees at AIA Vermont and DVRA that will be reviewing the rough draft. So I'd like to request that the rough draft be, maybe you could focus first on the response and the recommendations part, the lower part of the body of your report, and maybe circulate that by a given date so that these two groups can actually plan ahead for a meeting. We need time for people to read it, be able to have a meeting, and then be able to kind of put together a response and have everyone agree to it. So that probably takes 3 or 4 days. So I'm wondering if the response and the recommendations could be distributed by, say, Monday, the 28th.
I'm looking at Richard.
We can try.
Yeah.
There's just, it's really squeezed, as you know, but, we realize that there's not a lot of time by to get everything out with enough time for everybody to review this before the first, and, you know, I think we can do our best.
I think that'd be great. I think it would bring a lot more coherence early, which would save a lot of time. Thank you.
I think it's inevitable too. We end up with some editing, you know, between November 1 and publication.
Yeah.
Yes, certainly. And if we need to have another meeting, we could do it virtually, or, you know, if there are some things, you know,
No. I'm out of town. We're out of time and I'm out of town, so.
Yeah, it's just sometimes it becomes really challenging to do group edits by email without having a conversation. So that's just what I'm anticipating.
Yeah.
But at least for us to look at it and then be able to bring prepared notes would be great.
Certainly, no, but you know, then, I mean, the burden then comes back to us with 10 different perspectives, and I don't feel comfortable picking and choosing without the committee sort of weighing in and compromising or coming up with alternative solutions. So it's a challenge for the authors to decipher whose points rise to the top, and you know, if there, hopefully there won't be differences of opinion, but inevitably there will be.
Why'd you look at me?
Kelly, one point I guess we haven't coordinated on to date is we do have the SharePoint site set up, and so is that a forum for written feedback on the draft when it's?
No, we cannot have, that's a quorum if you have everyone working on a document together. It has to be
Okay, so
individual
only for
comments
reference.
go to one person, and then they incorporate it or not, and then you should discuss it at the meeting. So it's a very tight timeline, and I feel like we really have to make decisions at the next meeting on what's going in, and we should probably warn a vote on recommendations in case it comes up, because it should be voted on probably at the next meeting. So wordsmithing is one thing, but what goes in recommendation wise should, you know,
What's the
probably be
process?
voted on.
The warning being through the working group email distribution.
Well, for the agenda, like the agenda should have that there could be a vote on recommendations. So everyone's aware of that. And then it should be decided at the next meeting, and fine, content could change in the report, but the recommendation shouldn't change after the next meeting, in my opinion.
And the wording of that would be individually and in whole for those recommendations, because we could vote on some recommendations, like others that.
Well, the vote would, if
So you're
a
voting-
majority of the group wants it in, but then there's a dissenting opinion if you don't like it. So if the group votes, what we did last time is the group votes, put a recommendation in, it goes in, and the dissenters can put, you know, we put a few sentences in after the recommendation
That's
saying
all.
we don't agree with it.
We're gonna
Yeah.
vote on recommendations individually,
Yeah,
not in whole.
right,
Oh, yes.
right, yes.
And then there's room, that's how you said for, if you don't agree with the vote, you can offer comments to help
And
present the other point of view.
And last time, we actually worked with the dissenters specifically to craft the wording as
Yeah.
they saw fit. So-
Right. Yeah, there wasn't, yeah.
There also should be far fewer recommendations to vote on
Right,
this time.
yes.
Hopefully.
Hopefully that'll speed it along, yeah.
Is there time for one more quick comment? I was just going to comment.
We
on something
need
you
to
thought.
check in with the audience to see if there's any member of the public that wants to speak to it. But please go ahead.
I was just going to say something that you've already kind of touched on a little bit, which is that rather than just taking all the recommendations from the previous report and putting it in the appendix, I'd suggest that we take the ones that have not had action on them, that the group still thinks are standing recommendations, and put those up front. And then the appendix would only be for the recommendations that are done, that don't need further action. Does that make sense?
It does to me. Yeah, I think I agree with that.
You sold the authors.
But Kelly has some opinions on this as well, too.
Well, I mean, Yeah, like when we said at the other meeting that we weren't gonna bring everything from the previous one in, it was so dense, but I mean, the recommendations I think are fine, but we didn't want to repeat all the stuff in the previous because it was a massive report that no one read, frankly. And so I want to be thoughtful about, you know, what we put in this report because of that, because it was too large and too voluminous and it just didn't get paid attention to.
I agree. And to my earlier point that this year's report is narrower and deeper rather than wide, like there are also some recommendations that may be cut. Things that are kind of secondary or tertiary.
Like a radio show.
Like, I was thinking of that exact example.
I will say to Zach's point though, going through those recommendations was very painful and very long, like as you can imagine. So, but if it's just a vote.
It's a little bit like dental work.
Yeah.
So let's go to the screen. Are there any members of the public here today that wanted to speak that have not spoken yet in our meeting? Sorry. Okay, not hearing anyone, then if there's nothing else for the committee to talk about today, then we are adjourned. Thanks very much to everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.